The incident that sparked my ultimate revenge happened last Sunday. We were gathered for dinner at my sister Imani and her husband Chad's new $2 million mansion in Atlanta. Imani is 34 and obsessed with projecting an image of flawless wealth. She married Chad, a 36-year-old white finance broker who oozes arrogance. My parents, Valerie and Harrison, worship the ground Chad walks on because he provides Imani with the country club lifestyle they desperately wanted. I walked into their dining room wearing a simple black blouse and tailored trousers. I prefer quiet elegance, but in my family, if you are not covered in designer logos, you are destitute. I had barely taken my seat when my mother started her routine. She looked me up and down, her lips pursing in disapproval. "You wore that to a housewarming celebration, Zuri," my mother asked, her voice carrying across the table. "I would have thought you would try to dress up a little to honor your sister's massive achievement. I suppose that decorating hobby of yours does not leave much room in the budget for proper clothes." I placed my napkin on my lap, keeping my face blank. My decorating hobby was actually a luxury real estate development and private equity firm that I built from the ground up. To them, I was just the girl who flunked out of business school and spent my days arranging throw pillows. I learned long ago that sharing my wins only invited sabotage, so I chose silence. Imani flashed her massive diamond ring. "Do not be too hard on her, Mom," Imani said with a sweet smile. "Not everyone has the head for high-level finance like Chad does. Some people are meant to be the hired help. It takes financial success to secure a property like this. You should be taking notes, Zuri. Maybe Chad can give you some tips." Chad let out an obnoxious laugh. The man reeked of unearned confidence. "Now, Imani, do not overwhelm your sister," Chad said, his tone dripping with condescension. "The real estate market is brutal right now. It takes real capital to play in the big leagues. It is not for the faint of heart. You stick to picking out paint colors, Zuri. Leave the heavy lifting to the men who know how to leverage assets." My father raised his glass of expensive bourbon. "That is exactly right," Harrison declared. "A man who knows how to provide is a rare thing. Zuri, you really need to stop fighting reality and find yourself a man who can take care of you. Look at how beautifully Chad takes care of your sister. This house is a testament to what real ambition looks like. You are 31 years old. It is time to get serious about your future." I sat there listening to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally as they ripped me apart to inflate Chad's ego. My mind flashed back 10 years ago. I had begged my father for a $500 loan to pay for college textbooks. He told me the family was broke, and I needed to fend for myself. Yet that same week, my parents found $20,000 to pay for Imani and Chad's destination honeymoon. They literally stole my chance at an education to fund my sister's aesthetic. I had to drop out work 3 grueling jobs and build my empire in the shadows while they paraded around playing the perfect wealthy family. "You are quiet tonight," Zuri, Imani taunted, taking a sip of her champagne. "You are jealous, are not you? It is okay to admit it. It is hard seeing your older sister living the dream while you are still struggling to find your footing." I looked at Imani, then shifted my gaze to Chad. Despite his arrogant posture, I noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his glass. I noticed the tiny beads of sweat forming along his hairline. And most importantly, I noticed the stack of mail sitting on the console table in the hallway, specifically an envelope bearing a distinct red logo that I knew intimately. "I am not jealous, Imani," I said softly, allowing a small knowing smile to touch my lips. "I am just taking notes exactly like you suggested. I think I am finally starting to understand how Chad's brand of high-level finance really works." The air in the room seemed to chill for a fraction of a second. Chad's eyes darted toward me, a flash of pure panic breaking through his smug facade before he quickly masked it. But the damage was done. The seed was planted. I stood up from the table perfectly composed. "Thank you for the dinner, but I have an early morning with a very important client. I will leave you all to celebrate your massive success." I walked out the front doors of their leased luxury illusion, feeling the cool night air hit my face. They thought they had put me in my place, but they had absolutely no idea that the ground beneath their feet was already crumbling, and I was holding the sledgehammer. My mother laughed right in my face and told me I would never have a house like my sister. My father nodded. My sister teased that I was just jealous of her perfect life. So I invited my sister over for tea. When she arrived, she called our mother hysterically, screaming that she had to come see this right now. My name is Zuri. I am 31 years old, and my family has always considered me the ultimate failure. Before I tell you how a simple invitation to tea destroyed their fake reality, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to use your success to crush the arrogant people who look down on you. Chad leaned against the arched doorway of the formal dining room. The ice clinked sharply against his crystal glass as he swirled his expensive bourbon. He took a slow sip, his eyes scanning me with utter disdain. In a family that worshipped at the altar of black excellence, my parents had somehow decided that Imani marrying a white finance broker was the ultimate crowning achievement. Chad walked toward the table, the heavy thud of his designer loafers echoing against the hardwood floors. He stopped right behind Imani, placing one hand possessively on her shoulder, his gaze locked entirely on me. "I have a proposition for you, Zuri." Chad said, his voice loud enough to ensure my parents stopped their conversation. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, and tossed it onto the pristine white tablecloth right next to my dinner plate. "I am converting the third bay of the garage into a temperature-controlled wine cellar next week. You need the cash, right? You can come by on Saturday, scrape the old paint off the baseboards, and put on a fresh coat. Consider that 20 in advance. Do a good job, and I will throw in another 50. Imani giggled, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. Valerie and Harrison said absolutely nothing. My mother even offered a slight nod of encouragement, as if Chad was performing an act of profound charity that I desperately needed. I did not flinch. I looked at the crumpled $20 bill, then slowly slid my index finger across the linen tablecloth, pushing the money right back. "I appreciate the offer, Chad," I said. "But I think you need that $20 much more than I do." Chad let out a breathless scoff. "Is that right? I offer you a lifeline and you want to be ungrateful. You are decorating cheap apartments for college students, Zuri. Do not act like you are above manual labor when you are barely scraping by." I ignored him entirely. Instead, I shifted my gaze across the long table, locking eyes with my father. "It is funny how money works in this family, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. 10 years ago, I sat at our old kitchen table and begged you for a $500 loan so I could buy my textbooks for my sophomore year of college. Do you remember what you told me?" Harrison cleared his throat. "Zuri, this is not the time or the place for ancient history. You looked me dead in the eye," I continued, "and you told me the family was completely broke. But the very next morning, you and Mom wired $25,000 to pay for Imani and Chad to spend 3 weeks in the Maldives. You literally stole my education to finance his luxury vacation." Valerie gasped. "How dare you speak to your father that way," she snapped. "We made a strategic family investment. Imani was marrying a man with serious financial prospects. You were just taking frivolous art classes. It was completely different." "I am not taking art classes, Mom," I replied, my voice steady. "I run a highly profitable business. But of course you would never bother to ask about that." Chad stepped forward, slamming his hand flat against the dining table. "You run a glorified hobby, Zuri," he sneered, his voice dropping into a patronizing growl. "Do not ever compare your little side hustle to what I do. You have absolutely zero concept of how high-level finance actually works. You do not understand what it takes to secure a $2 million property like this one. You are out of your depth." He leaned closer. "You will never sit at the adult table, Zuri. You will never understand real wealth." I slowly stood up from my comfortable dining chair. As I rose, my eyes drifted past Chad's shoulder, catching sight of the marble entryway console just behind him. Sitting on a stack of glossy magazines was a thick, legal-sized envelope. It was turned slightly sideways, but the emblem printed in the top left corner was unmistakable. It was a sharp, geometric red crest. My heart gave a slow, powerful thump. I recognized that logo instantly. It was the exact logo of Vanguard Holdings. Vanguard Holdings is not a bank. It is a specialized subsidiary debt collection firm owned entirely by my private equity company. I purchased bad commercial debt, and that envelope meant Chad was hiding a catastrophic financial secret right under my family's nose. The irony of his arrogant speech washed over me like a cool breeze. The arrogant man lecturing me about high-level corporate finance was currently drowning in massive amounts of debt owed directly to my own company. "You are absolutely right, Chad," I said very softly, grabbing my purse. "I do not understand your brand of high-level finance at all." I turned my back on them and walked straight out the front door, leaving their fake world intact for just a few more days. I had to get home. I had some incredibly important tea to brew for my lovely sister, and I needed to prepare. The drive back to my home took exactly 45 minutes, which was just enough time for the adrenaline to settle and the cold, calculated strategy to take over. I stepped out of my private elevator and walked directly into the sprawling, open-concept kitchen of my penthouse at Rosewood Estates. The camera tracks me as I toss my keys onto the massive, custom-cut Calicotta marble island. The space is dead quiet, illuminated only by the warm, ambient glow of the under-cabinet lighting and the breathtaking, unobstructed view of the city skyline stretching out behind me through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls. I pull my phone from my purse and look directly at you. The family group chat. Every scapegoat knows this digital battlefield. It is the place where passive-aggressive comments go to thrive, where golden children are endlessly praised, and where any achievement of yours is either ignored or systematically dismantled. My family's group chat is charmingly titled The Core Four, a name Imani chose years ago. I tap the screen, opening the chat, and I start typing. "Having tea at my new place this Sunday," I read aloud as my fingers fly across the digital keyboard. "I would love for Imani and Chad to drop by." I hit send. Then I set the phone face up on the cold marble and wait. I do not have to wait long. In my family, responding to me is a competitive sport to see who can deliver the sharpest put-down under the guise of sibling banter or parental concern. The screen lights up the harsh ping echoing in the quiet luxury of my kitchen. I pick it up, walking slowly along the edge of the island, reading the response to the camera. Imani is the first to strike naturally. She replies with 3 loudly crying, laughing emojis. Then comes the text. "Your new place. Zuri, Chad, and I are absolutely exhausted from hosting our own housewarming in our new house. Are you sure your little studio apartment can fit us? We really do not want to spend our Sunday sitting on floor cushions because you do not have enough chairs." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It is fascinating how the golden child always needs to remind you of their perceived superiority. Imani's entire identity is wrapped up in being better than me. She cannot simply accept an invitation. She has to establish the hierarchy before she even walks through the door. She needs me to know that her $2 million house is a mansion, and whatever space I occupy must inevitably be a cramped, miserable shoebox. Before I can even formulate a reply, the phone pings again. This time it is my mother. Valerie never misses an opportunity to protect her prized son-in-law. I read my mother's text aloud, my voice flat, mimicking her haughty tone. "Zuri, if your sister and her husband are generous enough to take time out of their busy weekend to visit your new place, please make an effort. Do not serve that cheap supermarket bagged tea you always drink. Chad has a very refined palate. He is used to high-end imported loose leaf. Do not embarrass us." I stop pacing and lean against the marble counter, looking right into the lens. Do not embarrass us. That is the family motto whenever I am involved. My mother is so blinded by Chad's country club facade that she genuinely believes his palate is as refined as his bank account is supposed to be. She is bending over backwards to ensure I cater to a man who just handed me a crumpled $20 bill to paint his garage. I walk over to my custom glass front pantry. I slide the heavy door open and reach for a hand-painted imported tin of incredibly rare white tea. It costs more per ounce than the lease payment on Chad's luxury SUV. I set it on the counter. Chad's refined palate is about to taste absolute ruin, and he will not even realize it until it is too late. I pick up my phone again. I do not defend my living situation. I do not promise my mother that I will buy the good tea. I do not engage in the emotional warfare they are so desperately craving. Arguing with toxic family members is a losing game because they thrive on your defensive energy. The only way to win is to deal exclusively in undeniable, overwhelming reality. I open my map application. I wait for the blue dot to lock onto my exact coordinates at the very top of the highest, most exclusive hill in the city. I tap the screen, select share location, and drop the pin directly into the family group chat. I set the phone down and start boiling the filtered water. 10 seconds pass, then 20. The silence from the group chat is heavy. I can almost picture them sitting in Imani's heavily mortgaged living room, staring at their screens, squinting at the map, trying to make sense of the location I just sent. They are zooming in, checking the cross streets, their minds desperately trying to rationalize why my location pin is sitting dead center in a zip code they can barely afford to drive through. The phone vibrates violently against the marble. It is Imani. She is not using emojis anymore. I pick it up and read her frantic text to the camera. Zuri, did you drop the wrong pin? I am looking at the map, and this is the ultra-exclusive Rosewood Estates. That is a guarded billionaire community. What are you doing there? Are you cleaning houses for them now? There it is. The absolute refusal to believe I could be anything more than the help. Even when presented with the geographical coordinates of my success, Imani's brain forcefully rejects it. To her, it makes more sense that I am scrubbing toilets in a luxury estate than actually residing in one. She needs me to be the struggling failure so she can continue playing the successful matriarch. I look down at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I do not send a paragraph explaining my private equity firm. I do not send photos of my custom Italian furniture or the panoramic views. I simply smile a cold, sharp smile and type 4 words that will end her fake reality forever. Just come to the gates. Sunday afternoon arrived with a crisp, clear sky. I sat on my plush velvet sofa, sipping a freshly brewed cup of that expensive white tea my mother was so deeply concerned about. I tapped a button on my smart home control panel. Instantly, the massive television screen mounted on my living room wall transitioned to a live, high-definition video feed from the main security gates of Rosewood Estates. I did not have to wait at the door like a nervous host. I had a front-row seat to the exact moment my family's reality began to fracture. Right on schedule, a gleaming black SUV aggressively pulled into the visitor lane. I recognized the vehicle immediately. It was Chad's ultimate status symbol, a heavily leased top-of-the-line luxury car that he used to intimidate valets and impress his equally fraudulent country club friends. The car jerked to a halt in front of the fortified wrought iron gates. The tinted driver's side window rolled down, revealing Chad, wearing a designer polo shirt and his oversized, flashy watch. Imani sat in the passenger seat, wearing oversized sunglasses, looking thoroughly annoyed to be dragged to what she assumed was my miserable, cramped apartment. I unmuted the audio feed on my tablet, leaning back into my sofa to enjoy the show. Chad did not bother with a greeting. He simply leaned out the window and barked at the head of security. "Open the gate, buddy. We are here to see Zuri. She is doing some interior design work for one of the residents up there." Marcus, the head of my security team and a decorated former Marine, stood perfectly still. He did not press the button to open the massive iron gates. He simply looked down at his digital manifest with a completely blank expression. "I do not have a work order for any decorators today, sir," Marcus said, his voice calm and authoritative. "What is the resident's last name?" Chad let out a loud, theatrical sigh of frustration, slapping his hand against the steering wheel. "Listen to me, I do not know the client's name. My sister-in-law is Zuri. She told us to meet her here. She is probably picking out curtains or painting baseboards for somebody with actual money. Just look up her name on the vendor list and let us through. I do not have time to sit here arguing with a gatekeeper." Imani leaned over, pulling her sunglasses down the bridge of her nose. "Please, just let us in." she whined, her voice dripping with that unbearable entitlement she perfected over the years. She sent us the pin drop. If she is not decorating, she is probably cleaning the place. Just open the gate before my husband gets angry. You really do not want to deal with him when he is angry. I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the warmth. It was fascinating to watch them in their natural habitat. This was exactly how they navigated the world, bullying service workers, demanding special treatment, and constantly asserting their fake dominance. Chad puffed out his chest, resting his arm on the doorframe to make sure Marcus got a good look at his expensive watch. I am an executive at Vanguard Holdings, Chad demanded, his face turning an ugly shade of red. You are going to press that button right now, or I am going to call the property manager and have you standing in the unemployment line by Monday morning. Do you understand me? Marcus did not flinch. He did not break eye contact. He slowly lowered his tablet and took a single step closer to Chad's window. I watched Chad's posture stiffen, the false bravery instantly draining from his shoulders as Marcus loomed over the vehicle. Sir Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a chilling absolute authority. Zuri does not decorate houses here. She does not paint baseboards, and she certainly does not clean them. Chad scoffed, though it sounded a bit breathless. Then what the hell is she doing here? Marcus leaned down slightly, looking right past Chad to lock eyes with Imani in the passenger seat. Miss Zuri owns the $20 million estate at the very top of the hill. She has authorized your entry. I suggest you drive carefully. Her imported cobblestone driveway does not take well to oil leaks. I watched the color completely drain from Chad's face. His mouth fell open, forming a silent word that died in his throat. Imani ripped her sunglasses entirely off her face, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock and rising terror. They sat frozen in their leased SUV for 10 agonizing seconds. The heavy iron gates slowly swung open with a deep mechanical hum, clearing the path to my domain. Chad slowly rolled up the window. The car crept forward, no longer roaring with arrogant speed, but crawling through the gates like a wounded animal entering a lion's den. I switched the camera feed, tracking their progress as they drove up the winding, meticulously manicured road of the estate. Rosewood Estates is not just a neighborhood, it is a fortress of generational wealth. As Chad and Imani drove higher, they passed sprawling mansions with private tennis courts, massive water features, and luxury sports cars parked in circular driveways. The higher you go, the more expensive the real estate becomes. And my house sits at the absolute peak. I watched their car turn the final corner onto my private street. The tall privacy hedges parted to reveal my home. It is a breathtaking, ultra-modern architectural masterpiece. Floor-to-ceiling black glass, sharp geometric angles, massive stone pillars, and a sprawling infinity pool that seems to drop off the edge of the city. The driveway is paved with imported black cobblestone leading up to a massive custom pivot door made of solid oak. Through the windshield camera glare, I could see them staring. The arrogant banter they had undoubtedly shared on the car ride over was entirely gone. Chad stopped the car at the base of my driveway. He did not pull all the way up. He simply put the car in park and stared at the sheer magnitude of my wealth. Imani was clutching the dashboard, her knuckles turning white. They thought they were coming to mock my struggle. They thought they were coming to assert their dominance. Instead, they had just driven straight into the undeniable concrete proof of their own pathetic inadequacy. And the best part was, they had not even seen the binder sitting on my glass coffee table yet. I stand on the Juliet balcony of my master suite, the cool afternoon breeze gently catching the edges of my emerald green silk loungewear. Below me, the camera orbits in a smooth, continuous circle, capturing the absolute stillness of the moment. I am looking down at my imported black cobblestone driveway like a grandmaster analyzing a chessboard. And right there, sitting frozen at the base of my front steps, are my two little pawns. The engine of Chad's leased SUV idles loudly, the sound harsh against the quiet serenity of the estate. The heavy tinted doors finally click open. Imani steps out first. Her designer stilettos hit the stone, but her legs actually wobble. I watch from above as she grips the car door for support, her neck craning back as she attempts to take in the sheer scale of the property. The floating black glass, the cascading water features the immaculate landscaping meticulously maintained by a full-time staff. It is simply too much for her fragile reality to process. Chad steps out of the driver's side a moment later. The arrogant swagger he carried just 5 minutes ago at the security gate has completely evaporated. He is running his hands through his hair, his mouth slightly open, pacing in tight, frantic circles around the front bumper. He looks up at the massive stone pillars, shaking his head in aggressive denial. He cannot compute what he is seeing. His brain, hardwired to believe I am beneath him, is short-circuiting. Imani's hands are shaking violently as she fumbles with her designer clutch. She pulls out her phone, aggressively tapping the screen, and immediately puts it on speakerphone. The acoustics of my courtyard are spectacular. Her voice echoes up the stone walls, carrying every ounce of her spiraling hysteria straight to my balcony. "Mom! Mom, answer the phone," Imani shrieks, pacing back and forth next to Chad, her voice echoing over the manicured lawns. Valerie's voice crackles through the speaker, laced with her usual bored condescension. "Imani, what is it? I am at the country club with your father. Are you at your sister's little apartment yet? Did she actually serve you bagged tea? Mom, you have to see this right now." Imani screams, her voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. "We are not at an apartment. We are at Rosewood Estates. Zuri is in a $20 million house." There is a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. The clinking of country club silverware in the background abruptly stops. "What on earth are you talking about?" Imani Valerie demands, her tone shifting from bored to furious. "Zuri does not live at Rosewood Estates. That is impossible." "I am staring right at it, Mom," Imani yells, pointing frantically at my front door, even though her mother cannot see her. It is a mansion. It is the biggest house on the hill. She must be squatting here, or she is doing something highly illegal. There is no way she can afford this. She paints baseboards for a living. Chad suddenly leans into the phone, his voice loud and desperate as he tries to rationalize his shattered ego. "Valerie, listen to me. This is Chad. She is obviously running a scam. Nobody buys a house like this without a massive corporate portfolio. She probably rented it for the afternoon just to spite us. Or she broke in while the real owners are out of town on business. There is zero chance she has the capital for a down payment in this zip code." I take a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, savoring the absolute chaos unfolding below. My own family, presented with undeniable proof of my success, instantly assumes I am a squatter or a criminal. They would rather believe I am committing a federal offense than accept the fact that I am exponentially more successful than their golden child. The toxic hierarchy they built their entire lives around is collapsing, and they are grasping at straws to keep it standing. "You need to get over here right now, Mom." Imani is practically hyperventilating at this point, pacing so fast she nearly trips on the cobblestone. She is going to ruin the family name. If she gets arrested for trespassing in a place like this, Chad's corporate reputation will be destroyed. "Call Dad and get in the car right now." "We are leaving the club immediately." Valerie snaps through the speaker, her voice trembling with rage. "Do not let her leave that property, Chad. We are coming to put a stop to this nonsense before she embarrasses all of us." The line goes dead. Imani drops her phone into her purse, covering her face with both hands, taking deep, ragged breaths. Chad is still pacing, muttering to himself about property taxes, escrow, and rental fraud, desperately trying to rebuild the walls of his fragile superiority. I step back from the balcony, placing my empty teacup on a silver tray. The time for watching from the shadows is over. I glide through my master suite, my silk loungewear flowing behind me like liquid emerald, and make my way toward the grand floating glass staircase. Every step I take down the glass treads feels like a culmination of a decade of silence. 10 years of being the punchline at every holiday dinner. 10 years of smiling through their relentless insults. 10 years of letting them believe their heavily financed $2 million debt trap was the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. I am not angry anymore. I am completely serene. I am a predator walking toward a trap that has already been sprung. I reach the expansive marble foyer. My private estate manager, a sharply dressed man named Julian, is waiting silently by the entrance. He looks at me, raising a single eyebrow in question, his hand resting on the heavy brass handle. I give him a brief curt nod. The massive custom oak pivot doors are practically silent as Julian pulls them open, revealing the massive stone courtyard. The bright afternoon sun floods into the dark marble foyer, illuminating the spectacular crystal chandelier above me. The sudden movement catches their attention. Chad and Imani snap their heads toward the open doorway. They freeze entirely, their bodies locking up as if they have seen a ghost. I step gracefully onto the top tier of my expansive front porch, holding a fresh cup of perfectly brewed imported white tea. The steam curls elegantly into the air. I look down at my sister and her arrogant husband, my face a mask of absolute chilling calm. "Do not just stand in the driveway, Imani," I say, my voice slicing through the afternoon air with crystal clear precision. Chad's leased car is leaking oil on my imported cobblestone. Chad's jaw clamped shut so fast I could almost hear his teeth grind together. The arrogant flush drained entirely from his face, leaving him a pale, sickly shade of white. He slowly reached forward and killed the engine, clearly terrified of actually leaving a permanent stain on a driveway that cost more than his entire net worth. Imani practically stumbled out of the passenger side. Her designer stilettos hit the stone, but her knees actually wobbled. I watched from my elevated position as she gripped the car door for physical support, her neck craning back as she attempted to take in the sheer scale of the property. The floating black glass, the cascading water features the immaculate landscaping meticulously maintained by a full-time staff. It was simply too much for her fragile, carefully constructed reality to process. I stepped backward, sweeping my arm inward with practiced, chilling elegance. "Welcome to my little studio apartment," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and light. "I hope you do not mind sitting on the floor cushions." They walked inside like trespassers, expecting a security alarm to go off at any second. My living room boasts 24-foot ceilings with a custom chandelier that mimics falling rain. The furniture is bespoke, the artwork curated over years of silent, highly lucrative acquisitions. Chad shoved his hands deep into his pockets, his eyes frantically scanning the room for any sign of a real owner. A family portrait of strangers, maybe. A piece of mail with someone else's name. But there, sitting proudly on the entryway console, was a framed photograph of me cutting the ribbon at my private equity firm's downtown headquarters. He stared at it, the cogs in his brain grinding to a painful sparks flying halt. Imani collapsed onto a plush velvet sofa, clutching her designer bag to her chest, like a life preserver in a stormy ocean. She looked physically ill. The hierarchy she had worshipped her entire life, the very foundation of her identity as the superior older sister, was dissolving right under her expensive heels. We waited in suffocating silence. I finished my tea, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Neither of them spoke a single word. They were too busy drowning in their own inadequacy. Exactly 20 minutes later, the aggressive screech of tires echoed through the open courtyard. The heavy thud of car doors slamming shut followed immediately. Frantic footsteps pounded against the cobblestone. Julian, my estate manager, pulled the massive front doors open just as my parents reached the threshold. My mother, Valerie, barged in, her face flushed dark red with exertion and absolute outrage. Harrison, my father, was right behind her, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. They stopped dead in their tracks the moment they crossed into the grand foyer. The sheer magnitude of the estate hit them like a physical brick wall. My father looked up at the ceiling, his mouth falling open as he took in the floating glass staircase and the indoor koi pond. But my mother did not marvel. Toxic people do not marvel when their designated scapegoat wins. They attack the victory. Valerie's initial shock morphed instantly into a vicious defensive rage. She could not accept that I had outgrown the small, pathetic box she had forced me into. She marched straight into the center of my living room, completely ignoring the breathtaking architecture, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "Whose house is this, Zuri?" she demanded, her voice echoing sharply against the glass walls. "I want the truth right now. Are you squatting here? Did you break in?" I stood up slowly from my armchair, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle from my silk trousers. I live here, Mom. I own it. Valerie let out a harsh, mocking laugh that held absolutely no humor. You do not own a $20 million estate. You decorate cheap college apartments. Are you sleeping with a married man? Is that what this is? Do you have some wealthy benefactor hiding upstairs? Or are you running some kind of illegal scam? My father stepped forward, snapping out of his awe, his face hardening into a mask of stern disapproval. Zuri, this is not a game, he barked. You are going to embarrass this family. We have spent decades building a respectable name in this city. Chad is a high-level executive. He is on the fast track to becoming a partner. If you are involved in something fraudulent, the authorities will look into all of us. You are going to ruin Chad's corporate reputation with your reckless behavior. Tell us who really owns this property before I call the police and report you for trespassing myself. I looked at the four of them. My sister shrinking into the sofa. My brother-in-law hiding behind my parents like a frightened child. My mother accusing me of selling my body. And my father actively threatening to have me arrested to protect the reputation of a man who was currently drowning in debt. It was the perfect tragic portrait of my family. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. I did not explain my investment portfolio or my corporate acquisitions. Arguing with them was exactly what they wanted. It would drag me down into the mud where they felt most comfortable. Instead, I stood perfectly still, letting their hysterical accusations hang in the dead quiet air of my mansion. Then I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The sound was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Julian stepped silently out of the shadows of the hallway. In his hands he carried a thick, heavy leather binder. The geometric red crest of Vanguard Holdings was deeply embossed into the front cover. Julian walked with measured steps, stopping right beside me. He extended his arms and placed the binder directly into my hands. I stepped forward and tossed it onto the custom glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud that made Imani physically jump in her seat. "It is my house, Mom," I said, my voice dropping into a register of absolute chilling authority. "But we are not here to talk about my real estate." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the leather cover of the binder. "We are here to talk about Chad's." The silence in the room turns absolute. It is the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a catastrophic impact. I watch the camera push in slowly on Chad's face. Every micro-expression is magnified under the harsh, modern lighting of my living room. I can see the exact moment the gears in his head jam. A bead of sweat forms at his hairline, catching the glare of the chandelier. His eyes dart frantically from the heavy leather binder on the glass table to my face, then back to the binder. The geometric red crest of Vanguard Holdings is burning a hole in his vision. He knows that logo. He knows exactly what it means. I can see the primal fear creeping into his throat, swallowing the arrogant white privilege bravado he has worn like a suit of armor his entire life. For a fraction of a second, Chad is a cornered animal. But narcissists do not surrender. They deflect. The terror in his eyes is quickly forcibly buried under a loud, booming, entirely artificial laugh. The sound is harsh and grating, echoing off the marble floors. He claps his hands together, puffing out his chest as he takes a step away from the coffee table, physically distancing himself from the undeniable truth sitting right in front of him. "You really went all out for this little stunt," Zuri, Chad says, his voice dripping with forced amusement. "I have to admit, you almost had me for a second." He turns to my parents, throwing his arms wide. "Do not worry, Valerie. Harrison, this is exactly what I was talking about in the driveway. It is all a show. Anyone can rent a luxury property for a day on one of those high-end apps. She probably hired that guy at the front door to play security, and this guy here to play the butler." He gestures dismissively toward Julian, who remains perfectly still, his expression carved from stone. Imani lets out a shaky breath, her hands dropping from her face. "Oh, thank God," she gasps, desperately latching onto Chad's reality. "I knew it. I knew there was no way you actually own this place, Zuri. You are unbelievable. Renting a mansion just to try and make us feel bad, that is deeply pathetic even for you. My mother visibly relaxes, her shoulders dropping as she steps closer to Chad, seeking the comfort of his familiar arrogance. I should have known, Valerie scoffs, crossing her arms over her chest. Honestly, Zuri, this is a new low. We drove all the way up here in a panic because you wanted to play some childish game of pretend. Do you have any idea how irresponsible this is? Wasting money on a daily rental when you are barely scraping by decorating dorm rooms? You are a complete embarrassment. Chad is emboldened by their support. His fragile ego pieces itself back together, fueled by my family's relentless need to see me fail. He walks right up to the edge of the glass coffee table, looking down at me with absolute contempt. He runs a hand through his hair, striking a pose that screams corporate superiority. Listen to me, Zuri, Chad says, his tone dropping into a patronizing lecture. You want to pretend you are playing in the big leagues, but you do not even know what the big leagues look like. Real wealth is not renting a house for an afternoon to take pictures for social media. Real wealth is liquid assets. It is leverage. It is a diversified, ironclad real estate portfolio. He taps his chest, a smug, satisfied grin stretching across his face. That is what I do. I secure legacy wealth. I make genius investments that generate actual compounding equity. You cannot fake that with a rented house and a prop binder. You are out of your depth, little girl. You are trying to sit at a table where you cannot even afford the cover charge. My father nods in agreement, stepping up beside Chad. He is right, Zuri. Chad handles multi-million-dollar acquisitions before breakfast. He actually understands how money works in the real world. You should be asking him for financial advice instead of pulling these ridiculous theatrical stunts. You need to apologize to your sister and her husband for wasting our time. I do not say a word. I simply let them finish. I let Chad build his pedestal as high as he possibly can, because the higher the pedestal, the more devastating the fall. I look at Imani, who is now smiling, her confidence completely restored, as she leans against her husband's arm. I look at my parents, who are looking at me with the same disappointment they have weaponized against me for 31 years. Then I set my teacup down on the silver tray. The clink of china against metal rings out, cutting through Chad's self-satisfied smirk. I lean forward, sliding my fingers over the smooth leather cover of the Vanguard Holdings binder. I flip it open. The sound of the heavy pages turning is the only noise in the room. I do not rush. I take my time scanning the pristine, heavily redacted corporate documents until I find the exact page I am looking for. I slide it out from the rings. It is a single crisp sheet of paper densely packed with financial figures, routing numbers, and legally binding signatures. I hold the paper loosely in my hand, resting my elbows on my knees. I look up at Chad. His smile instantly vanishes. The sweat has returned to his brow, thicker this time. Genius investments, Chad. I ask, my voice barely above a whisper yet, carrying the destructive force of a hurricane. Like the third mortgage you secretly took out on Imani's house with a predatory lender at 18% interest just to cover your crypto losses. Imani let out a sharp, ragged gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth, her oversized sunglasses slipping down her nose as she whipped her head around to stare at her husband. The sheer confusion in her eyes rapidly morphed into absolute panic. Chad, what is she talking about? Imani asked, her voice trembling. A third mortgage. You told me we owned the house outright. You told me the crypto market was just a long-term hold. Chad staggered back a half step, bumping against the edge of the glass coffee table. The polished country club facade he wore like a second skin, completely shattered. Sweat beaded visibly along his hairline. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, and then his survival instincts kicked in. He lunged forward, grabbing Imani by the shoulders, forcefully turning her away from me. Imani, look at me, Chad demanded, his voice thick with a desperate artificial bravado. Do not listen to a single word coming out of her mouth. She is out of her mind. You know how she is. She has always been jealous of you. She is sitting here in this ridiculous rented house forging financial documents just to ruin our marriage because she is miserable and alone. It is a pathetic, psychotic setup. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply flipped to the second page of the heavy leather binder. "Let us look at the forensics of your genius investments, Chad," I said, my voice carrying the sharp clinical precision of an executive board meeting. On October 12th, you received a massive margin call from your offshore crypto exchange. Your portfolio had tanked by 73% overnight. To cover your heavily leveraged positions, you bypassed traditional banking entirely because your debt-to-income ratio is an absolute disaster. Instead, you went to Apex Financial Solutions, a mezzanine debt lender known for predatory practices, and collateralized the remaining equity in Imani's home. Chad spun around, his face flushed with a furious mottled red. "Shut up!" he roared, taking a step toward me. "You do not know what you are talking about. You know nothing about high-level liquidity. It was a strategic bridge loan. It is standard corporate maneuvering. A bridge loan at 18% compounding interest with a balloon payment due in exactly 14 days. I shot back effortlessly, slicing through his pathetic attempt at finance bro jargon. "That is not a strategy, Chad. That is financial suicide. You cross-collateralized your primary residence against highly volatile digital assets. Your loan-to-value ratio is sitting at 110%. You are completely underwater. You do not own a mansion, Chad. You own a spectacularly decorated liability." Imani sank onto the edge of the velvet sofa, her legs literally giving out beneath her. She stared at Chad, her eyes wide and pleading. "Tell me she is lying, Chad. Tell me you did not leverage my house. Mom and Dad gave us the down payment for that house. While you were busy lecturing me about securing legacy wealth, I continued taking a slow, deliberate step toward the center of the room. I was actually building it. 10 years ago, you all sat around the Thanksgiving table and laughed at me. You mocked me for living in a tiny studio apartment and taking what you called frivolous art classes. You assumed my interior design business was just a cute little side hustle. What you did not bother to ask, and what I never bothered to tell you, was that I was not just designing commercial spaces, I was evaluating them. I looked directly at my father, who was standing frozen in the entryway, his face completely pale. While you were wiring $25,000 to fund their luxury vacations, I was attending seminars on distressed asset acquisitions. I used the profits from my design firm to quietly purchase my first commercial plaza in a neglected downtown district. I flipped it, doubled my capital, and rolled it into purchasing bad commercial debt from over-leveraged, arrogant men who thought they were the smartest guys in the room. Men exactly like Chad. Chad opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His chest heaved as he struggled to maintain his footing. His shifting eyes betrayed the absolute terror gripping his mind. "You leased a luxury SUV to look wealthy," I said, my gaze locking back onto Chad. "I acquired equity to actually be wealthy. I spent the last decade building a private equity portfolio that specializes in liquidating toxic debt. I buy the catastrophic mistakes of fake millionaires for pennies on the dollar, and I collect the assets." Imani buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, humiliating sob. The reality of her situation was finally crashing down upon her. The country club memberships, the designer bags, the sprawling suburban estate. It was all built on a crumbling foundation of lies and high-interest loans. She was married to a fraud, and her entire identity was tied to a life she could no longer afford. Chad looked like he was going to vomit. His eyes darted toward the massive oak doors, clearly calculating if he could make a run for it before the sheer weight of his humiliation crushed him completely. He was stripped bare, his corporate persona absolutely destroyed in front of the very people he had spent years trying to impress. Suddenly, the sharp click of my mother's designer heels broke the heavy silence. Valerie pushed past my father, marching straight toward the glass coffee table. Her jaw was set, her eyes flashing with a desperate, fierce denial. She could not process the fact that her golden son-in-law was a financial disaster. To accept Chad's failure meant accepting her own terrible judgment. "Stop it right now, Zuri!" Valerie snapped, her voice trembling but loud as she placed herself defensively between me and Chad. "I do not want to hear another word of this technical nonsense. Even if he made a mistake, he is a good provider. He is an executive. The bank will work with him. They always work with high net worth individuals. You do not understand how these things operate in the real world. Vanguard Holdings is a respected, powerful firm, and they will help him restructure this temporary setback. I looked at my mother. I looked at the fierce, blind loyalty she was still offering to a man who had lied to her face, a loyalty she had never once offered to her own daughter. I did not yell. I did not argue with her desperate delusions. I simply stood in the center of my flawless $20 million living room and smiled. It was a slow, chilling smile. I turned my back on her and walked toward a sleek, flush-mounted smart home control panel embedded in the obsidian accent wall. I raise a single finger and tap the glowing glass interface twice. The camera tracks the fluid motion of my hand, then pans upward as a soft electronic chime echoes through the expansive living room. From the seamless wood-paneled ceiling, a massive 120-inch 8K OLED screen descends with glacial, intimidating grace. The ambient lighting in the room automatically dims to a sophisticated low, plunging my family into shadows while the bright, harsh glare of the screen illuminates their terrified faces. I swipe my finger across the control panel, casting a digital document directly from my encrypted server onto the display. The stark white background of a corporate registry fills the room, the black text rendered in crisp, undeniable definition. I turn around slowly, bathing in the blue light of the screen, my eyes locking onto my mother's horrified face. Vanguard Holdings won't work with him, Mom. Because Vanguard Holdings isn't a bank, it's a subsidiary of my private equity firm. Chad hasn't been paying a bank. For the last 6 months, he's been defaulting on payments to me. The words hung in the air, illuminated by the cold blue light of the 120-inch OLED screen above us. The massive digital document displayed Chad's signature right next to my corporate seal. Imani let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. She scrambled backward on the velvet sofa, putting physical distance between herself and the man she had paraded around as the pinnacle of black excellence for the past 5 years. Her perfectly manicured hands dug into the expensive upholstery. Defaulting Imani choked out her chest, heaving as she stared at Chad. "You are defaulting on loans to my sister, Chad. Where is our money? Where is the liquid capital you brag about every single day?" Chad refused to look at her. He stared at the floor, his jaw working furiously, his face slick with a cold sweat. "Answer me!" Imani screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch that completely shattered her carefully cultivated upper-crust persona. The country club dues, the summer lease in the Hamptons, the $50,000 kitchen renovation we just finished last month. Did you pay for any of that with your own money, or is everything we own financed by some shadow company? "Do not do this right now, Imani," Chad muttered, his voice low and dangerous. He finally snapped his head up, his eyes narrowing into a vicious glare. "Shut your mouth before you embarrass us both even more." "Embarrass us?" Imani practically launched herself off the sofa. She pointed a trembling finger at the massive screen hanging from my ceiling. "You took out a predatory loan against my house. The house my parents put the down payment on. You leveraged my sanctuary to cover your gambling losses in crypto, and you did not even have the basic competence to hide it from Zuri. My friends are going to find out. The entire country club board will know we are bankrupt. My image is completely destroyed." The mention of her image was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Chad, completely stripped of his arrogant finance bro armor, went feral. The cornered rat finally bared its teeth. "Your image!" Chad roared, taking a threatening step toward his wife. "You want to talk about your precious image? Your image is the reason we are in this mess, Imani. You are a bottomless pit of shallow, insatiable greed." Valerie gasped, rushing forward to grab Chad's arm. "Chad, stop it! Do not speak to my daughter that way!" Chad violently shook off Valerie's hand, his eyes wild with unhinged rage. He did not care about my parents anymore. He did not care about the facade. He only cared about shifting the blame. "No, Valerie, you need to hear this," Chad sneered, pointing aggressively at Imani. "You raised a parasite. Do you know how much it cost to keep up her pathetic charade? She insisted on the $90,000 car because her friend got one. She demanded the kitchen remodel last month just because Zuri leased a new apartment, and Imani had to prove she was doing better. She drains my accounts dry just to maintain the illusion that she is the superior sister. I watched in absolute silence, standing perfectly still as the ugly, rotting core of their marriage spilled out onto my imported rugs. This was the man my parents had held up as the gold standard. This was the marriage I was supposed to be jealous of. "You are a liar and a failure," Imani shrieked, stepping right up to Chad, her face contorted with absolute fury. "I married an executive. I married a provider. I did not marry a pathetic fraud who has to beg predatory lenders for cash to fund his stupid crypto addiction. You promised me legacy wealth, Chad. You promised me a lifestyle. And now you have handed the deed to my home over to the sister I cannot even stand." Chad let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "I promised you a lifestyle I have been drowning in debt for 3 years trying to keep your fragile ego intact. Every time you swiped that black card to buy another designer bag to show off at brunch, I was pulling from our savings. You ruined me, Imani. You and your desperate need to look down on everyone else. You bled me dry." Imani slapped him. The sound cracked like a whip across the expansive living room. Chad's head snapped to the side. He slowly turned back to look at her, his eyes blazing with a dark, hateful intensity. He raised his hand, pointing a single finger right between her eyes. "I am filing for divorce," Chad said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I am filing for divorce, and I am leaving you with the debt. Let us see how long you survive in your precious country club when you are penniless and living in a foreclosed house." Imani let out a guttural, agonizing wail and collapsed onto the floor. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Her entire world, built on superiority designer labels and toxic comparisons, had just been completely vaporized. My mother rushed to Imani's side, dropping to her knees on the marble floor. She wrapped her arms around her weeping golden child, shooting venomous glares at Chad. My father, however, remained standing. Harrison had been silent this entire time, his mind clearly racing as he processed the financial documents glowing on the screen above us. He understood the math. He understood what a balloon payment meant, and he understood exactly who held the deed to his favorite daughter's home. Harrison slowly turned away from the spectacle of Chad and Imani's dissolving marriage. He walked toward me, his posture shifting. He puffed out his chest, attempting to summon the patriarchal authority he had used to control me for 30 years. He stopped a few feet away, plastering a highly unconvincing diplomatic smile onto his face. "All right, Zuri," Harrison said, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "You made your point. You played your hand beautifully. You proved you are successful, and Chad made a catastrophic error in judgment. We see that now, but we are not going to let this tear the family apart." I tilted my head, studying the desperate calculation in my father's eyes. "You own the debt," Harrison continued, his voice taking on a low, persuasive tone. "You have the power to fix this right now. You are obviously rich. You have this massive estate, this private equity firm. You do not need the money from Imani's house. Just wipe the debt clean, Zuri. Forgive the loan. Cancel the foreclosure proceedings today. For family, do not put your sister out on the street over Chad's mistakes. If it is about the principal of the loan, your mother and I will pay you back from our retirement fund. We will set up a payment plan. Just make this Vanguard Holdings nightmare go away." I looked at my father, taking in his incredible audacity, and I smiled a slow, chilling smile. The chilling smile completely vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, calculating emptiness. I did not blink. I did not waver. I held my father's desperate, bargaining gaze and let the absolute silence of the room stretch out for a long, agonizing moment before I finally spoke. "You cannot pay me back from your retirement fund, Dad." Harrison's diplomatic peacemaker expression froze. The fake paternal authority he had been trying to project evaporated instantly. His hands, still raised in a gesture of surrender, slowly dropped to his sides. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the heavy leather binder resting on the glass coffee table, then back up to the massive digital screen illuminating the room. "What do you mean?" Harrison asked, his voice losing its booming resonance, reducing to a raspy, uncertain croak. "I have a substantial portfolio. We have liquid assets. We can make you whole, Zuri. Just tell us the number." I turned my back on him, and walked slowly toward the coffee table. My heels clicked against the marble floor with deliberate, rhythmic precision. I picked up the leather binder. It felt heavy, loaded with the catastrophic secrets my family had spent years trying to bury. "You do not seem to understand how I operate, Dad," I said, my voice carrying the clinical detachment of a surgeon about to make an incision. "When my private equity firm acquires a portfolio of toxic distressed debt, we do not just buy the paper blindly. We run a comprehensive forensic financial audit on every single debtor. We track the origin of every wire transfer. We unmask every shell company. We scrutinize every desperate hidden signature." I flipped to the third page of the binder. I did not even need to look at the smart home control panel on the wall. I simply tapped a button on my tablet and the massive OLED screen above us shifted. The corporate registry vanished, replaced by a highly detailed scanned copy of a mezzanine loan agreement dated exactly 24 months ago. Let us talk about the timeline of Chad's financial genius. I continued pacing slowly around the edge of the velvet sofa. 2 years ago, Chad's cryptocurrency portfolio took its first massive hit. He was heavily over-leveraged. The offshore exchanges demanded their money, and traditional banking institutions literally laughed him out of their offices. His credit was already a smoldering crater. He was desperate. He needed cash to keep up the illusion of his high-rolling lifestyle, and he needed guarantors with unblemished credit scores to co-sign the shadow loans. Imani, who had been sobbing into her hands on the floor, suddenly went entirely still. She slowly lowered her hands. Her makeup was ruined, her eyes red and swollen. She looked up at the screen, her gaze tracing the black text of the loan agreement until it hit the bottom of the page. There, magnified in crisp, undeniable high definition, were 3 signatures. The first was Chad's, the second and third belonged to my parents. Imani's breath hitched. She stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process the impossible betrayal staring back at her. She slowly turned her head, looking away from her husband and locking eyes with my mother. "Mom," Imani whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the word. "Dad, you signed this. You knew." Valerie pressed her hand against her mouth, a quiet, panicked sob escaping her throat. She could not look at Imani. She turned her face away, staring at the floor as if wishing it would swallow her whole. "You knew 2 years ago that my husband was a fraud," Imani shrieked, scrambling to her feet. The realization of the psychological betrayal hit her harder than the financial ruin. "You sat at my dining room table. You smiled at me while I bragged about our new cars and our summer rentals. You let me believe I had the perfect marriage, the perfect life, while you were secretly bailing him out behind my back. We were trying to protect you," Imani Harrison pleaded, taking a step toward her. His voice was thick with panic. "We did not want you to suffer the humiliation. Chad said it was a temporary cash flow problem. He promised us he would make the money back on the next market upswing. We just wanted to keep the family intact." "You were not protecting Imani," I interjected, my voice slicing through his pathetic defense like a razor. "You were protecting your own massive egos. You could not stomach the thought of your country club friends finding out that your golden son-in-law was a broke, incompetent grifter. You preferred to let your favorite daughter live a complete lie rather than admit your judgment was flawed." I took a step closer to my parents. The sheer hypocrisy of their actions fueled the icy calm in my veins. "While you were actively lecturing me about my frivolous life choices," I said, my gaze locking onto my father. "While you were rolling your eyes at my studio apartment and my design business, you were secretly draining your own liquidity to finance a criminal-level con artist. You threw your money into a black hole just to maintain the illusion of black excellence." Imani let out a sound of pure agony. She turned on Chad, her fists clenched. "You let my parents pay for your failures. You let them risk their money because you were too much of a coward to admit you were broke." "I am not finished," I said, silencing the room instantly. The screen above us held the loan document, but I knew what was on page 4. I knew the specific, terrifying detail that my parents were praying I would not reveal. "Shadow lenders do not just take a signature based on a good credit score, Dad," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "They operate outside the bounds of traditional banking. They deal with high-risk, desperate clients. And because the risk is astronomically high, they demand a pound of flesh. They demand hard, tangible collateral that hurts to lose. Something that guarantees the cosigners will bleed before they ever default. Harrison's face went completely ashen. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. He took a staggering step backward, gripping the back of a leather armchair just to keep himself upright. "Zuri, please," Harrison begged, his voice cracking. "Do not do this." I ignored him entirely. I turned my attention to my mother. Valerie was trembling violently, her designer dress shaking as she clutched her arms around herself. The fierce, arrogant matriarch who had spent my entire life making me feel like a secondary citizen was entirely broken. I walked right up to her, invading her personal space, forcing her to look at me. "Your retirement fund was not enough to secure a loan of this magnitude." "Mom," I stated, staring directly into her terrified, tear-filled eyes. "You and Dad had to pledge a physical asset, something permanent, something you owned outright." I leaned in closer, my voice an unrelenting whisper. "Say it, Mom." Valerie squeezed her eyes shut, shaking her head frantically side to side. "No," she whimpered. "No, please, Zuri. Tell your favorite daughter what you put on the line to finance her fake life." I demanded, my tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Tell Imani exactly what asset you leveraged as collateral to save her fraudulent husband." Valerie let out a loud, agonizing wail. She covered her face with both hands, sobbing so hard her entire body convulsed, absolutely refusing to speak the words that would destroy our family forever. "Fine. I will say it for you," I stated, my voice dropping to a deadly, absolute calm. I tapped the tablet screen in my hand one more time. The massive digital document displayed on the OLED screen above us shifted smoothly, scrolling down and zooming in on the addendum clearly labeled, "Schedule a Secured Assets." I read the text aloud, making sure every single syllable echoed through the cavernous, silent expanse of my $20 million living room. $150,000, held in the Evelyn Grace Thomas Irrevocable Trust. The words hung in the air, thick, suffocating, and dripping with a decade of poison. The silence in the room became absolute, broken only by the sound of my mother's ragged, hyperventilating gasps as she remained huddled on the marble floor. "Grandma's trust fund?" I said the words tasting like ash and long-awaited vindication. "The fund she specifically set up for my education. The fund you managed as the executor, Dad." I walked slowly toward my father, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. I forced myself into his line of sight, refusing to let him look away. He was sweating profusely, his chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked rhythms. "Do you remember the conversation we had this summer before my junior year of college?" I asked, my voice rising in volume, fueled by a reservoir of suppressed rage that had been boiling for 10 years. "Do you remember sitting me down at the kitchen table wearing your saddest, most sympathetic patriarchal expression?" Harrison tried to avert his eyes, but I stepped closer, trapping him in his shame. "You told me the recession had hit us hard." I continued, my words striking him like physical blows. "You told me the market had crashed, the investments had gone bad, and the money was just gone. You looked your 20-year-old daughter directly in the eyes, put your hand over mine, and told her that her grandmother's dying gift had vanished into thin air." Harrison opened his mouth, a pathetic, trembling squeak escaping his lips. "Zuri, please, we intended to—" "Shut up!" I roared, the sound vibrating through the glass walls of the room. "You told me I had to drop out of my design program. You told me I had to pull myself up by my bootstraps and learn the value of hard work." While Imani was getting her tuition fully paid in cash, while she was getting a massive down payment for a suburban mansion, I was scrubbing espresso machines at a coffee shop at 4 in the morning. I turned my furious gaze on my mother. "I worked 3 jobs. Mom, I worked retail until midnight, woke up to open a cafe before dawn, and spent my weekends doing freelance data entry. I ate ramen noodles and skipped meals for 3 years. I destroyed my physical and mental health because I thought we were victims of a tragic financial crisis. I thought our family was struggling." I pointed a sharp, accusing finger directly at the glowing screen above us. "But it was not a crisis, was it? It was a theft. My mother flinched violently as if I had struck her across the face. "You stole my future to fund his," I said, jabbing my finger toward Chad, who was standing frozen by the sofa. "You took the money my grandmother left specifically to secure my education, and you handed it over to a predatory shadow lender to bail out a crypto gambling addict. You literally sacrificed your youngest daughter to finance a fake millionaire lifestyle for your golden child." The reality of the betrayal was so monstrous, so deeply vile that it defied all logic. I looked over at Imani. My perfect, flawless sister was sitting completely rigid, her eyes darting nervously between Chad, my parents, and the loan document on the screen. The blood had drained entirely from her face. "You knew," I stated. It was not a question. It was a cold, hard fact. Imani jerked backward, pressing herself against the back of the velvet sofa. "No, Zuri? I swear I did not know where the money came from," I thought. "Do not lie to me," I shouted, taking a step toward her. "Look at the dates, Imani. Look at the timeline. Chad was drowning in debt. He was getting margin called. He needed a massive injection of capital to save your precious country club membership and keep your leased cars in the driveway. Mom and Dad suddenly magically produced $150,000 in hard collateral. You are incredibly greedy, Imani, but you are not stupid." Chad let out a bitter, ugly scoff that cut through the tension. Of course she knew. She was the one who suggested it. Imani shrieked, launching herself toward Chad with her hands curled into claws. "You bastard! Shut your mouth!" Chad easily caught her wrists, shoving her back onto the cushions with a disgusted sneer. "Why should I protect you? You just threw me under the bus in front of your family to save your own image. Let them know exactly who you are, Imani. Tell your sister how you cried to your mommy and daddy about how humiliating it would be if you had to sell your Porsche. Tell her how you reminded them about the trust fund Zuri was not even using since she was just playing around with frivolous art classes." Imani covered her ears, letting out a high-pitched scream for him to stop, but the truth was already out, staining the pristine filtered air of my living room. I stood there processing the absolute staggering depravity of my own blood. They had all conspired against me. My mother, my father, my sister, and her husband. They had sat around their elegant dining tables, clinking crystal wine glasses and toasting to family values, while actively stealing the foundation of my life to prop up an illusion. Imani had worn designer clothes paid for by my stolen education. Chad had driven luxury cars financed by my grandmother's legacy. My parents had bought their golden child's affection with the very money intended to secure my future. I had walked 3 miles in the snow because I could not afford bus fare, while Imani complained that the heated seats in her SUV took too long to warm up. Harrison had sat at Thanksgiving dinners looking at my exhausted, dark-circled eyes and had the audacity to ask me when I was going to get a real job, knowing full well my tuition money was sitting in an escrow account to cover Chad's bad bets. The visual perspective of the room begins to shift rapidly, capturing the sheer magnitude of their destruction. A quick cut to Harrison's face. He is ashen, sweating profusely, his patriarchal authority utterly dismantled and replaced by the pathetic terror of a man caught in an unforgivable lie. A sharp cut to Valerie. She is sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, her designer jewelry clinking against the floor, entirely stripped of the arrogant superiority she wielded like a weapon her entire life. A fast pan to Chad. He is sneering like a trapped feral animal, his corporate bravado completely stripped away, leaving only toxic malice and financial ruin. A sudden snap to Imani. Her eyes are wide, manic, and filled with the sheer, unadulterated terror of a woman whose entire fraudulent image-obsessed existence has just been permanently exposed to the light. The rapid, chaotic sequence of their horrified, guilty faces finally stops. The camera angle drops low, angling sharply upward to capture me standing tall in the dead center of the room. I am an immovable force bathed in the cold blue light of the digital ledger that holds their fate. I am no longer the family scapegoat. I am the executioner. "You literally stole my life," I said, my voice echoing with a terrifying absolute calm. "You took everything from me to feed a black hole of vanity, and now I own it all." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. The words hung in the sterile, climate-controlled air of my living room, suffocating the four people who had spent my entire adult life treating me like a disposable asset. I stood tall, the cold blue glow of the massive OLED screen casting long, sharp shadows across the marble floor. I looked at the digital display, the irrefutable proof of their financial treason, and then back down at the shattered remains of my family. Imani was rocking back and forth on the velvet sofa, her hands clutching her designer dress, muttering, denying phrases under her breath. My mother was completely incapacitated, a weeping, crumpled heap of expensive jewelry and regret. My father stared blankly at the wall, his jaw slack, a man who had finally realized the price of his own vanity. But Chad was different. I watched his physical transformation with a morbid, clinical fascination. The initial terror, the sweat beading on his forehead, the frantic, cornered panic, all of it suddenly vanished. Narcissists do not possess the capacity for genuine shame. When they can no longer deny the evidence, they do not apologize. They attack. They rewrite the narrative to make themselves the hero, or at the very least the victim of someone else's incompetence. Chad slowly stood up straight. He rolled his shoulders back, adjusting the lapels of his custom Italian suit. A dark, ugly sneer twisted his features, completely erasing the polished, charismatic finance executive he pretended to be. He looked at my parents on the floor, then at Imani, and finally his gaze locked onto me. The sheer arrogance in his eyes was blinding. "You own it all," Chad repeated, his voice dripping with a toxic, condescending venom. He let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. "You think you are a genius, Zuri? You think you did something spectacular here? You are nothing but a bottom-feeding debt collector. You buy the scraps off the floor." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my face entirely impassive, letting him dig the trench deeper. "Let us get one thing straight," Chad spat, taking a confident, aggressive step toward the center of the room. "You never deserved that trust fund. You were a dropout. You were an aimless, ungrateful child playing around with color swatches and fabric samples. You wanted to waste $150,000 of legacy wealth on some mediocre design program. That money would have yielded a 0% return on investment. You were a liability to the family portfolio." Imani looked up, her eyes wide with fresh horror, as her husband boldly justified stealing her sister's future. "Chad, stop," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Shut up!" Imani, Chad snapped, not even looking at her. He kept his furious, burning gaze fixed entirely on me. "I took that capital because I am a visionary. I understand high-yield leverage. I understand market mechanics. I took a stagnant, useless asset and put it to work. I was trying to multiply that wealth for the family dynasty. I was trying to build an empire while you were serving coffee and living in a pathetic studio apartment." He began pacing the length of the coffee table, his hands gesturing wildly, completely consumed by his own delusional grandeur. "You think you are so smart because you caught a bad market cycle?" he shouted, his face flushing a furious, mottled red. The crypto market crashed. It was an unprecedented algorithmic anomaly. It was a black swan event. It was not a failure of strategy. It was a failure of the global market. And yes, your parents co-signed. Yes, we used your little college fund as collateral, because your father understood that real wealth requires risk. He understood that my financial acumen was infinitely more valuable than your cute little hobby. Chad stopped pacing and leaned over the glass coffee table, planting his hands firmly on the surface and glaring up at me. "We did what we had to do to protect the family image," he snarled, his voice dropping into a vicious, elitist register. "You were an embarrassment, Zuri, a college dropout scrubbing floors. We took that money to elevate the family name. We took it so Imani could network with the right people, so we could sit on the right boards, so we could actually achieve Black excellence, instead of just talking about it. You were never going to do anything with that money anyway. You should be thanking me. I gave your inheritance a purpose." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from him was staggering. He had literally stolen my grandmother's dying gift, forced me into years of poverty, and now stood in my $20 million home, claiming he had done me a favor. I did not yell. I did not scream. I simply stood there, breathing in the sterile air, allowing his confession to saturate the room. I let my eyes drift casually up to the sleek black dome mounted in the corner of the ceiling. It was a state-of-the-art 360-degree security camera, equipped with 4K resolution and broadcast-quality audio capture. The tiny red LED light pulsed steadily, a silent witness recording every single syllable of his arrogant, unhinged confession. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice slicing through his heavy, panting breaths. Chad scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. "What are you going to do? Zuri foreclose on us? Take the house. Go ahead. It is a civil matter. It is a secured loan. You hold the paper, you take the asset. That is the game. I will file for bankruptcy, wipe the slate clean, and be back on top in 2 years. You are just a glorified landlord. You have no real power over me." I smiled. It was the same chilling, empty smile I had given my mother earlier. "You really are as stupid as you are arrogant, Chad," I said, taking a slow, measured step toward him. "You think my firm just audits the collateral? You think Vanguard Holdings just checks the property value and files the paperwork? We are a liquidation firm. We dissect the anatomy of the debt. We pull the original loan applications. We verify the stated income. We authenticate the signatures." Chad's smug expression faltered. His arms slowly dropped to his sides. The color began to drain from his face once again. I swiped my finger across the tablet in my hand. The OLED screen above us changed instantly. The loan agreement vanished, replaced by a side-by-side comparison of 2 documents. On the left was Chad's original application to the shadow lender. On the right was his actual verified tax return from the IRS. "When you applied for this mezzanine loan," I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute terrifying clarity, "you stated your annual income was $4.2 million. You provided fabricated W-2 forms. You provided inflated bank statements. You manufactured a completely fraudulent financial history to secure the loan." Chad took a step backward, his mouth opening but no sound coming out. And then I continued, my gaze narrowing into a lethal stare. "There is the matter of the signatures. You see, when we ran the forensic analysis on the collateral pledge, we found a discrepancy. My mother and father co-signed the primary loan, but the secondary released the specific authorization required to liquidate the Evelyn Grace Thomas Irrevocable Trust that required the signature of the primary beneficiary." I pointed to a specific line highlighted in bright, glaring yellow on the massive screen. That required my signature, Chad. And since I was working a double shift at a coffee shop the day this document was executed, I know for an absolute fact that I did not sign it. "You did." Imani let out another horrified shriek, pressing her hands over her mouth. My father buried his face in the carpet, groaning in absolute despair. "You forged my signature to steal a federally protected trust fund," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the entire room. "You committed wire fraud to transfer the funds across state lines. You committed bank fraud by providing falsified tax documents to a lending institution." Chad's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the sofa to keep from collapsing, his chest heaving violently. "It was a mistake," he choked out, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I can fix it. I can get the money." "You cannot fix it, Chad," I replied, stepping right into his personal space, forcing him to look into my cold, unforgiving eyes. "Vanguard Holdings is legally obligated to report systemic fraud discovered during the acquisition of distressed assets. We do not negotiate with criminals. We report them." I turned my tablet off, the screen going black, casting the room into silence. I already forwarded the entire dossier, including the forged documents, the fake tax returns, and the audio recording of your confession tonight, to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are not going to foreclose on your house, Chad. They are going to put you in federal prison. I checked my diamond-studded watch, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. "In fact," I said, looking toward the massive oak front doors, "they should be arriving right about now." Chad's head snapped toward the grand entryway, his eyes wide with a feral, unadulterated terror. The heavy silence of the room was suddenly deafening. We all waited suspended in a suffocating vacuum of anticipation, listening for the sound of sirens or the heavy knock of federal agents. Nothing came. Not yet. But the psychological damage was already done. The mere possibility of the FBI marching through those doors shattered the last remaining fragments of Chad's fragile ego. The arrogant, high-yielding visionary evaporated into thin air, leaving behind a pathetic, trembling shell of a terrified man. His legs literally gave out beneath him. He did not stumble. He did not trip. He simply collapsed, dropping heavily onto his knees right in the center of my imported silk rug. This was the exact same man who just 7 days prior at my parents' anniversary dinner had snapped his fingers at me across the country club driveway. He had handed me a crumpled $20 bill and told me to go fetch his valet ticket because he did not want to stand in the cold. He had looked right through me, treating me like the hired help. Now he was crawling toward my designer heels, his hands clasped together in a desperate, agonizing posture of prayer. "Zuri, please," Chad sobbed. Actual tears streamed down his face, mixing with the cold sweat on his cheeks. His voice was a high-pitched, wretched whine that made my skin crawl. "I have a family," Chad pleaded, reaching out a trembling hand toward the hem of my trousers. "I have a reputation in this city. You cannot let them take me away. I will do anything. I will sign anything you want. I will work for you. I will give you every single cent I make for the rest of my life. Just call them off. Withdraw the complaint. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please, Zuri, I am begging you. Do not touch me," I said, taking a single disgusted step backward. My sharp tone echoed in the massive room, but it was not aimed solely at Chad. My father had suddenly gone completely rigid. Harrison's mind, always running the numbers and calculating the angles, had finally processed the specific legal terminology I had just used on the digital display above us. Bank fraud, wire fraud, forged federal documents. Harrison slowly turned his head to look at my mother. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. Valerie Harrison gasped, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying perfectly in the silent room. The signatures, if he forged the primary documents to secure the capital, and we co-signed the guarantee that makes us accomplices. Valerie's weeping stopped instantly. Her hands dropped from her face. The sheer terror of public humiliation was suddenly replaced by a much darker, far more realistic fear. Prison. The country club gossip would ruin her social standing, but federal conspiracy charges would put her behind bars. She stared at Harrison, her jaw hanging slack before her eyes darted toward me. In that exact moment, the panic inside my parents morphed into something entirely different. The shock faded, and the classic, deeply ingrained narcissistic defense mechanisms kicked in. They could not accept responsibility. They could not process their own guilt. Therefore, I had to be the villain. "You planned this!" Valerie shrieked, scrambling to her feet with a sudden frantic burst of energy. She pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "You orchestrated this entire trap just to destroy us." I watched her pivot from a weeping, broken woman into a vicious, aggressive attacker in less than 10 seconds. It was a masterclass in toxic manipulation. "We are your parents!" Valerie screamed, her voice echoing shrilly off the glass walls. "We gave you life, Zuri. You grew up in my home. You ate the food I put on the table. You slept under my roof. And this is how you repay us. By trying to send your own mother to a federal penitentiary. You are sick. You are a deeply disturbed, hateful child." Harrison immediately joined the assault, stepping forward to flank my mother. He puffed out his chest, using his physical size to try and intimidate me, pointing an aggressive finger at the tablet in my hand. "You are going to cancel that email right now," Harrison commanded, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You are going to call your contacts and wipe this slate clean. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to jail over a financial misunderstanding. Family protects family, Zuri. You owe us your loyalty. You are acting like a monster." I stood perfectly still, letting their desperate, venomous words wash over me. I did not yell back. I did not defend myself. I simply absorbed their pathetic display of gaslighting. They had stolen my grandmother's legacy. They had forced me into years of grueling poverty. They had leveraged my entire future to fund a criminal grifter simply because he looked good in a tailored suit. And yet, in their twisted, delusional minds, I was the monster for holding them accountable. Imani remained frozen on the sofa, her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach, watching her parents scream at me while her husband wept on the floor. Her perfect manicured life had completely disintegrated, leaving her trapped in the wreckage of her own superiority complex. I waited until my mother paused to take a ragged, furious breath. Then I slowly raised my hand. The gesture was small, but it carried the absolute, undeniable authority of the person holding the deed to their entire existence. The screaming stopped instantly. The room fell back into a dead, heavy silence. Chad held his breath on the floor. Valerie glared at me, her chest heaving. Harrison stood frozen, his finger still pointing in the air. I looked at each of them, my expression completely void of any sympathy, any hesitation, or any familial warmth. "I will not send you to jail," I stated, my voice ringing out with a terrifying clinical precision. "But I am foreclosing on the debt." I turned away from my parents and their desperate, hypocritical pleas. My gaze locked back onto Chad, who was still kneeling on the floor, his entire body trembling as he processed the fact that he was avoiding a federal prison sentence, but losing absolutely everything else. I took a deliberate, measured step forward, then another. I crossed the expansive living room, my movements tracked by the cold silence of the house, walking with the fluid, unhurried grace of an apex predator that had finally cornered its prey. I reached inside the heavy leather portfolio resting on the edge of the glass coffee table. My fingers closed around a thick, heavily stamped manila envelope. I stood directly over Chad. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and completely devoid of the arrogant, high-rolling finance bro persona he had worn like a suit of armor for the past 5 years. I held his terrified gaze for a fraction of a second, and then I let the envelope slip from my fingers. It landed flat against his chest, with a heavy, definitive thud before sliding down to rest in his lap. "Open it," I commanded. Chad fumbled with the metal clasp. His hands shaking so violently, he nearly tore the thick, reinforced paper. He pulled out the stack of legal documents, the bold black header glaring under the ambient lighting of the room. "Notice of default foreclosure and eviction." I recited smoothly, watching his eyes dart back and forth across the page as he read the horrific reality of his situation in stark legal print. "You have exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises. Vanguard Holdings is seizing the property." Imani scrambled across the carpet on her hands and knees, grabbing the edge of the document. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. 72 hours, she shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "You are taking my house, Zuri. You cannot take my house. We have nowhere to go. All of my things are there. My custom closet, my imported furniture, my entire life." "It is not your house, Imani," I corrected her, my tone dropping to a sub-zero chill. "It never was. It belonged to the shadow lenders your husband begged for cash, and now it belongs to me. You have been living in a showroom financed by my stolen college fund. The lease is officially up." Imani clutched her head, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her scalp. Her carefully curated upper-crust facade was completely shattered, reduced to absolute rubble. "You do not understand what you are doing," she wailed, rocking back and forth on her heels. "The country club board members live on my street. The Women's Auxiliary Committee is hosting a charity brunch at my house next week. If I get evicted, everyone will know I will be a laughingstock. I will be completely ruined socially. My entire reputation will be destroyed." I looked down at her, taking in the absolute mind-bending absurdity of her priorities. Her husband had committed federal wire fraud. Her parents had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars from their own child. Her entire marriage was built on a mountain of toxic, fraudulent debt. And in the face of complete financial and familial annihilation, Imani was genuinely worried about a brunch. I tilted my head, studying her tear-streaked, terrified face, and I let a slow, razor-sharp smile form on my lips. "You are just jealous, aren't you, Imani?" I asked, the words sliding off my tongue with perfect, lethal precision. Imani stopped rocking. She stared at me, her mouth falling open as she recognized the exact phrase she had thrown in my face countless times over the past decade. Every time I had struggled to pay my rent, every time I had shown up to a family dinner exhausted from working 3 jobs, she had looked down her nose at me and dismissed my pain as petty sibling jealousy. Now the tables were entirely turned. "Do not worry," I continued, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You can come clean my new house for tips if you need cash." Imani let out a guttural scream, a sound of pure, unfiltered agony, and buried her face in the sofa cushions. The socialite was dead. The reality of her impending poverty had finally crushed her. Harrison stepped forward, his face flushed with a desperate, calculating rage. Zuri listened to reason. He barked, trying to summon the ghost of his patriarchal authority. "Evicting your own sister is a public relations nightmare. It makes us all look bad. If you want the property, fine, take the deed, but let them stay. We can arrange a leaseback agreement. We can pay you rent. You cannot put your family out on the street. It is bad business." "Bad business," I countered, spinning around to face him. "Bad business is co-signing a mezzanine loan for a man who uses fake W-2 forms. Bad business is stealing your mother's trust fund and lying to your daughter about a global recession to cover your tracks. Do not ever try to lecture me on business again, Dad. You are a financial liability, and I am cutting my losses." Valerie pushed herself up from the floor, leaning heavily against the coffee table. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks, her designer dress wrinkled and pathetic. "Zuri, please," she begged, her voice trembling with a desperate attempt at maternal manipulation. "I am your mother. How can you look at me and be so cruel? We made a mistake, but we did it because we loved Imani. We did not want to see her fail. And you did not care if I died trying to survive?" I stated, the coldness in my chest freezing over any lingering attachment I had to the woman standing before me. "You loved her image more than you loved my life. You chose your favorite mom. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." I looked down at Chad, who was still staring blankly at the foreclosure notice in his lap. 72 hours, Chad," I repeated, ensuring the deadline was permanently burned into his mind. "I will have private security contractors waiting at the curb on Monday morning. If you, your wife, or a single piece of your fraudulent designer luggage is still on the premises at 9 in the morning, they will physically remove you, and I will reconsider handing that file over to the FBI." Chad swallowed hard, a single tear cutting a path through the sweat on his cheek. He gave a tiny, defeated nod. He was completely broken. I turned my back on all of them, walking slowly toward the massive oak double doors of my living room. I had stripped away their wealth, their secrets, and their arrogance. I had taken back the future they stole from me. "My name is on the deed," I said, pausing at the threshold without looking back. "My name is on the debt. You have exactly 3 days to pack up your lies and get out of my house." Chad remained paralyzed on the floor, staring blindly at the foreclosure notice resting on his chest. But my father was no longer looking at the pathetic, weeping man he had once paraded around as his ideal son-in-law. Harrison's eyes were darting rapidly back to the massive digital display, frantically reading the fine print of the collateral schedule I had left glowing on the screen. He was doing the math in his head. The mezzanine loan was secured by the stolen trust fund, but the shadow lender's total exposure, the massive balloon payment Chad had triggered, required extensive cross-collateralization to cover the spread. Harrison let out a sound like a punctured tire. He staggered forward, reaching out to grab my arm. I sharply pulled away, glaring at him with a warning look that froze him in his tracks. "The house," Harrison gasped, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon. "Zuri, the estate in Oakbrook. The lender put a lien on our primary residence when we co-signed that secondary line of credit for Chad." I raised a single eyebrow, feigning mild surprise. "I am fully aware of how a cross-collateralized debt structure works, Dad. When Chad defaulted, the lender initiated foreclosure proceedings against all secured assets. Imani's house was just the first domino to fall." Valerie let out a shrill, piercing gasp, her hands flying to her throat. The Oakbrook estate was her castle. It was the physical manifestation of her entire social identity, the venue for her lavish charity galas, and the ultimate undeniable proof of her superiority over her peers. The thought of losing it, of being exposed as a fraud in front of her high society friends, terrified her even more than the prospect of federal prison. "You cannot let them take our home," Valerie pleaded. She rushed toward me, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished marble. "We built that house from the ground up. Your father and I have lived there for 30 years. You grew up there. You cannot let some predatory lending firm throw us out onto the street like common criminals." "I am not letting a predatory lending firm do anything," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Vanguard Holdings owns the debt now, which means Vanguard Holdings owns the lien on your estate." Harrison swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. The arrogant, booming patriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, aging man facing total humiliating financial ruin. "Then you have to release the lien," Harrison begged, his voice cracking with panic. "You proved your point, Zuri. You destroyed Chad. You took Imani's house. You exposed all of us. You won. But you cannot do this to your mother and me. We will declare bankruptcy if we have to, but we cannot lose the estate. Please, I am asking you as your father. Save our home." I looked at the two of them. The people who had watched me drown in debt, who had stolen my grandmother's legacy, who had called my dreams a liability, were now standing in my living room begging for my mercy. I turned slowly and walked back to the glass coffee table. I picked up the thick leather binder and turned to the final tab. I pulled out a crisp, heavy stock document heavily embossed with a legal seal and held it out. Harrison's hand trembled violently as he reached out and took the document. Valerie crowded in next to him, her eyes scanning the bold text at the top of the page. "What is this?" Harrison asked, his eyes darting frantically across the legal jargon. "That is a quitclaim deed." I stated, my tone strictly business. "I am perfectly willing to absorb the entire remaining balance of the shadow loan. I will clear the massive debt, completely ensuring you do not face federal asset seizure or forced bankruptcy." A massive wave of relief washed over my mother's face. She actually let out a breathless, joyful laugh, reaching out her arms as if to hug me. "Oh, Zuri, thank God. I knew you would not abandon your family. I knew you had a good heart." I took a sharp step backward, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Read the rest of the document, Dad," I commanded. Harrison's eyes continued down the page. The relief on his face instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth opened, but he could not seem to force the words out. "Read it out loud," I insisted. Harrison shook his head, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "You are transferring the ownership of the Oak Brook estate directly to Vanguard Holdings." Valerie froze. "What? No, that cannot be right. Zuri said she was saving the house." "I am saving the house from the bank," I clarified, crossing my arms over my chest and staring directly into my mother's bewildered eyes. "I am buying the debt outright, but in exchange you are signing over the deed to the property. The house will no longer belong to you. It will belong to me." Valerie let out a horrified shriek. "You want to steal our home? You want to own the house we live in? You gave up ownership the second you used it to finance Chad's crypto addiction," I replied coldly. "You gambled your castle to protect your perfect image, and you lost. I am simply offering you a lifeline. You sign the deed over to me tonight, and you get to stay in the house." Imani looked up from the sofa, her tear-streaked face twisting in fresh horror. "Wait," Imani gasped. "If you take their house, where am I supposed to go? Chad and I have to vacate in 3 days. We were going to move into the East Wing at Oak Brook." I turned to my sister, offering a chilling smile. "I do not allow subletting. If you want to live at Oak Brook, you will have to submit a separate rental application, undergo a background check, and prove you have a stable income. Since your husband is facing federal wire fraud charges and your credit is utterly destroyed, your application will be automatically denied." Harrison clutched the document, his knuckles turning white. "You want us to live in a house owned by our daughter? We will be your guests?" I laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound that cut through the tension in the room. You will not be my guests, Dad. You will be my tenants. I reached into the binder one last time and pulled out a standard ironclad residential lease agreement, dropping it on the coffee table right in front of them. You will sign a month-to-month lease, I explained, my voice echoing with absolute authority. You will pay me market rate rent for the Oakbrook estate due on the first of every single month. You will cover your own utilities, your own landscaping, and your own property taxes. Valerie stared at the lease agreement as if it were a venomous snake. Rent. You want us to pay you rent to live in our own home? Where are we supposed to get that kind of money every month? We just lost our entire liquidity bailing out. Chad, that sounds like a cash flow problem, I replied, shrugging with the exact same casual, dismissive gesture she had used on me 1,000 times before. Perhaps you should look into downsizing your lifestyle. Or maybe you can pick up a few extra shifts at a retail job. I hear the local coffee shop is hiring. Zuri, this is extortion, Harrison yelled, his anger finally breaking through his fear. We cannot afford market rent on a 10,000 square foot estate. If we miss a payment, what then? Are you going to evict your own parents? I looked at him, my expression entirely unreadable, devoid of a single ounce of pity. If you miss a single payment by so much as 24 hours? I stated, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. I will serve you with a 3-day notice to quit. I will have the sheriff remove your belongings and change the locks just like any other delinquent tenant. Valerie began to sob hysterically, burying her face in her hands. How can you do this to us? How can you be so cold? We are your family. I held up my hand, silencing her completely. I won't send you to jail, but I am foreclosing on the debt. It's time you learned independence, Mom. Isn't that what you told me when I was 20? The heavy oak doors seemed to echo with the finality of my words. My mother stared at the lease agreement on the glass table, her mouth opening and closing in silent, suffocated horror. The woman who had spent decades curating an image of untouchable generational wealth was now staring at a standard month-to-month rental contract for her own primary residence. Harrison slowly reached out his hand, shaking violently, and picked up the pen resting beside the portfolio. He did not look at Valerie. He did not look at Imani. He simply clicked the pen and signed his name on the dotted line, trading his ownership for his freedom. Valerie quickly followed suit, her tears smudging the ink. They had saved themselves. They had chosen self-preservation over their precious, untouchable pride. From the velvet sofa, Imani watched the exchange with wide, uncomprehending eyes. The reality of the transaction was slowly filtering through her panic-stricken brain. She looked at the signed lease, then at my parents, and finally at me. Wait! Imani gasped, her voice shrill and frantic. What about us? What about me and Chad, Mom? Dad, where are we supposed to go? You cannot just sign that and leave us out in the cold. We were supposed to move into the East Wing. Valerie refused to make eye contact with her favorite daughter. She stared firmly at the marble floor, twisting the diamond ring on her finger. We cannot do anything, Imani, Valerie whispered, her voice stripped of all its usual authority. Zuri explicitly prohibited subletting. If we let you stay, she will evict us. We have no choice. We have to follow the terms of the lease. Imani shot up from the sofa. She looked at our mother as if she had suddenly grown a second head. Are you actually serious right now? Imani screamed, her voice breaking into a hysterical screech. You are abandoning me. I am your daughter. You are supposed to protect me. You told me Chad was a genius. You told me putting up my trust fund was a smart family investment. You encouraged this. Harrison finally snapped. The stress of losing his fortune, his home, and his dignity boiled over into a sudden, explosive rage. He turned on Imani, his face a furious, mottled red. Do not you dare blame us for this, Harrison roared. Your husband is a fraud. He lied to us. He showed us fabricated financials. We put our entire estate on the line to back his ridiculous crypto schemes because you begged us to support him. We are losing everything because of your terrible judgment in men. The toxic, impenetrable alliance that had held my family together for my entire life shattered in less than 30 seconds. There was no loyalty. There was no unconditional love. There was only greed, and now that the money was gone, they were turning on each other like starving wolves. Imani recoiled from our father's shouting, her chest heaving violently. She spun around to face Chad, who was still kneeling on the rug, staring blankly at the wall. The realization that her perfect elite lifestyle was entirely funded by a criminal finally broke through her denial. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You did this!" Imani shrieked, marching toward him with her fists clenched. "You ruined my life. You told me we were building an empire. You told me you were making millions. You are nothing but a pathetic, lying thief." She lunged at him, raising her hand high in the air, and brought it down hard, aiming a vicious slap directly at his face. Chad flinched, throwing his arms up to block the blow. Imani's manicured hand caught his forearm with a loud smack. She screamed in frustration and raised her hand to strike him again. "Do not touch me!" Chad yelled, scrambling backward across the rug like a cornered rat. He scrambled to his feet, his custom Italian suit wrinkled and covered in dust from the floor. He looked at Imani, his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. The polished, arrogant finance executive was completely gone. He was a coward who had just realized that the walls were closing in, and his wife was perfectly willing to throw him under the bus to save herself. "I have to go," Chad stammered, backing away toward the grand entryway. "I have to call my lawyer. I need to fix this. I need to get out of here. You are not going anywhere." Imani screamed, lunging for his jacket. "You are going to fix this right now." Chad violently yanked his arm free from her grasp. He did not say another word to her. He did not look at my parents. He turned on his heel and sprinted for the heavy oak doors. He threw them open, stumbling out into the cool evening air. Seconds later, the roar of his sports car engine echoed through the driveway, followed by the screech of tires tearing out of the estate. He had abandoned her. The man who had promised her the world had fled the moment the bill came due, leaving her completely stranded in the house he had just lost. Imani stood frozen in the center of the room, listening to the fading sound of the engine. Her shoulders slumped. The frantic, aggressive energy drained out of her, leaving behind a hollow, defeated shell. She slowly turned to look at my parents, but Harrison had already taken Valerie by the arm. They were backing away, their eyes fixed on the floor, desperately avoiding the wreckage of their golden child. "We need to leave," Harrison muttered to Valerie, his voice tight. "We need to go pack. We need to figure out our finances." They walked out the door, slipping away into the night, without offering a single word of comfort to the daughter they had spent a lifetime spoiling. They had saved their own skin, and Imani was simply collateral damage. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving Imani and me completely alone in the massive, silent living room. Imani slowly dropped to her knees on the imported silk rug. Her designer dress pooled around her. The flawless makeup she had carefully applied for the evening was ruined, streaked with dark lines of mascara and tears. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, crushing panic. She had absolutely nothing. No husband, no house, no money, and no parents to bail her out. "Zuri, please," Imani whispered, her voice cracking into a pathetic, broken sob. "Please, I have nowhere to go. My credit cards are maxed out. Chad took the only car we have left. I do not have a single dollar to my name." I looked down at her, maintaining the exact same cold, impassive expression I had worn all evening. "Just the guest house," Imani begged, clasping her hands together in front of her chest. "Just the pool house at the Oak Brook estate. I will not bother Mom and Dad. I will stay out of their way. You will not even know I am there. Please, Zuri, do not put me on the street. I am your sister." I let the silence stretch out, savoring the absolute role reversal. The golden child, the woman who had tormented me for my entire existence, was now begging for scraps on my floor. "I do not run a charity, Imani," I replied, my voice echoing coldly in the vast space. "The Oakbrook property is a strictly managed rental asset now. The guest house is already slated for renovation to increase its market value. I cannot have unauthorized squatters occupying premium real estate." Imani let out a ragged, choking gasp, pressing her hands against her face. "You have 72 hours to vacate this property," I stated, turning my back on her and walking toward the digital display to power it down. "I suggest you start packing. You are going to need a lot of cardboard boxes." Imani did not stand up. Instead, she regressed entirely, her manicured fingers clawing at the thick pile of the silk rug as she devolved into a full-blown infantile tantrum. She pressed her tear-streaked face against the floor, her shoulders heaving with ragged, ugly sobs, completely refusing to accept the reality of her impending ruin. She was the golden child, the untouchable favorite who had coasted through life on a wave of unearned privilege, and her brain fundamentally could not process the concept of a consequence. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer her a hand. I simply stood over her, breathing in the quiet, climate-controlled air of my living room, and shifted my gaze toward the shadowed archway of the grand hall. "Marcus!" I called out, my voice perfectly level. The visual shift in the room was immediate and cinematic. From the deep shadows of the corridor, Marcus stepped into the ambient glow of the living room, moving with a silent, imposing grace. Standing at 6'5" with shoulders broad enough to block a doorway, my head of security looked less like a bodyguard and more like a tactical operative in a tailored black suit. A coiled earpiece rested discreetly behind his ear, and his expression was a mask of pure, immovable granite. "It seems my sister is having trouble locating the exit," I said, gesturing casually toward the sobbing heap on the floor. "Please assist her, and ensure she reunites with our parents outside." "Yes," Ms. Thomas Marcus replied, his voice a deep, resonant rumble. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Imani let out a high-pitched shriek of indignation as Marcus reached down, his massive hands gripping her upper arms. With effortless mechanical efficiency, he hauled her off the floor. Her designer heels scrambled for traction against the marble as she thrashed, completely humiliated, her expensive silk dress twisting awkwardly around her legs. "Let go of me!" Imani screamed, batting her hands uselessly against his broad chest. "You cannot touch me. I will sue you. I will have you arrested." Marcus did not even blink. He did not speak to her, nor did he slow his pace. He simply turned and marched her across the vast expanse of the foyer, his grip firm and unyielding. I followed a few paces behind, watching the chaotic, undignified spectacle with absolute, unbothered satisfaction. The woman who had spent a lifetime treating me like dirt was now being physically carried out of my house like a bag of trash. Marcus reached the heavy oak double doors and pushed them open, stepping out onto the sprawling, illuminated portico. The crisp night air rushed in, carrying the sound of furious, panicked arguing. My parents had not gone far. Chad's cowardly, frantic exit had left them completely stranded. He had peeled out in the only vehicle they had arrived in, abandoning them on the sprawling grounds of my estate. Harrison was pacing back and forth on the cobblestone driveway, jabbing his finger aggressively at his cell phone screen, cursing the lack of available luxury car services in the area. Valerie stood nearby, shivering in her thin evening gown, her arms crossed defensively over her chest as she berated him for not driving himself. Their bickering stopped instantly as Marcus deposited Imani onto the top of the stone steps. She stumbled forward, nearly twisting her ankle before crashing directly into our mother. Valerie gasped, catching Imani by the shoulders. She looked up at Marcus in sheer horror, and then her eyes darted to me. I stepped out onto the portico, the warm golden light of the grand entryway framing me from behind. I looked down at the 3 of them, a pathetic, shivering cluster of ruined elites trapped on my driveway. "What is the meaning of this?" Harrison demanded, his voice cracking as he tried and failed to summon his old patriarchal bluster. "We are waiting for a car. You cannot throw us out into the cold." "This is private property," I stated smoothly, looking past him to the long, winding quarter-mile driveway that stretched out toward the massive iron gates of the estate. "And your visiting hours have officially expired." "Zuri, it is freezing," Valerie cried, clutching Imani tightly. "We have a 10,000 square foot estate to return to. But we have no car. You cannot force us to walk down that massive driveway like vagrants. It is completely humiliating." I looked at Marcus and gave a single subtle nod. From the manicured shadows of the portico pillars, 2 more members of my security detail stepped out, falling into step perfectly beside Marcus. They formed an impenetrable, imposing wall of black suits and crossed arms towering over my parents. "Escort them to the main gates," I instructed the team, my voice cutting through the night air like a blade. "Keep them moving. Do not let them stop on my property, and do not let them back in." The security team stepped forward in unison. Harrison instinctively backed away, his hands raised in a pathetic surrender. Valerie let out a loud, humiliated sob, grabbing Imani by the arm and dragging her down the steps. I stood on the portico and watched the glorious poetic justice unfold. The haughty status-obsessed family that had built their entire identity on looking down at others was now being physically marched off the premises. Harrison's shoulders were slumped in total defeat, his heavy breathing visible in the cool air as he struggled to keep pace. Valerie stumbled over the cobblestones, her expensive heels catching on the uneven surface, forcing her into an awkward limping shuffle. Imani dragged her feet, weeping loudly into her hands, completely shattered by the reality of her new impoverished existence. They looked small, they looked weak, they looked exactly like the frauds they had always been. Just before they reached the edge of the estate lighting where the shadows of the driveway consumed the path to the gates, Valerie stopped. She ripped her arm away from Harrison and turned back to face the mansion. Her face was twisted into a grotesque, furious mask of pure hatred. "You are dead to us!" Valerie screamed up the driveway, her voice tearing wildly through the quiet night. "Do you hear me, Zuri? You are a miserable, heartless monster. You destroyed your own blood. You are going to die completely alone." I did not flinch. I did not move. I stood perfectly still on the marble steps as the echo of her curse faded into the trees. Behind me, the soft, discreet rustle of fabric signaled the arrival of my lead butler. He stepped out of the doorway without making a sound, holding a polished silver tray. Resting on the tray was a delicate, steaming porcelain teacup. I picked up the cup by its fragile handle. The rich, earthy aroma of the tea drifted up, mingling with the crisp night air. I brought the cup to my lips, savoring the warmth as it spread deeply through my chest. I looked down the long, sweeping driveway, watching the security guards force my miserable, broken family into the darkness beyond the gates. "Alone," I replied, my voice calm, steady, and utterly victorious, but very, very rich. Exactly 30 days have passed since that spectacular, defining night. The profound silence that now fills my penthouse is not a void. It is a masterpiece. It is the sound of absolute, untouchable peace. The fallout from the Vanguard Holdings takeover was swift, brutal, and entirely public. The morning after I kicked my family off my property, the federal government finally unsealed their massive indictment against Chad. The charges were staggering: wire fraud, securities fraud, and flagrant multi-million-dollar embezzlement. But Chad did not stick around to face the consequences of his imaginary empire. Like the pathetic coward he had always been, he packed a single duffel bag and fled in the middle of the night. He is currently hiding out in a cheap cash-only motel somewhere in southern Florida, desperately trying to evade the FBI and the SEC. He left his wife with zero liquid assets, a mountain of legal debt, and a massive federal target on her back. Imani's spectacular downfall was the most satisfying domino to watch topple. With Vanguard Holdings taking immediate possession of the debt, I initiated a rapid, aggressive foreclosure on her precious custom-built McMansion. It was her ultimate status symbol, a gaudy, sprawling monument to her unearned vanity. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I drove out to the property, parked my car across the street, and drank a perfectly brewed latte while I watched a commercial demolition crew move in. I gave the signal myself. Watching the heavy iron wrecking ball smash directly through her imported Italian marble balcony was a profoundly therapeutic experience. I did not just seize her house, I bulldozed it to the ground. The lot has already been cleared and rezoned. Vanguard Holdings is breaking ground next month on a highly lucrative luxury wellness center. With her house reduced to rubble, her husband a federal fugitive, and her credit score completely decimated, Imani had absolutely nowhere to go. I kept my word. I firmly rejected her rental application for the main floors of the Oak Brook estate. But my parents, drowning in their own panic, could not bring themselves to throw her onto the street. So they struck a desperate compromise. Imani is now living in the estate's damp, unfinished basement. The golden child who once bragged endlessly about her 2-story walk-in closets and her fleet of luxury cars now sleeps on a cheap mattress surrounded by concrete walls, exposed plumbing, and storage boxes. But the humiliation did not stop there. Because my parents are bleeding cash just to cover their new rent, they flatly refused to pay for Imani's upkeep. She was forced to get a job. The woman who had never worked a hard day in her entire 30 years of existence is now a retail associate at a high-end boutique downtown. It is the exact same boutique where she used to drop thousands of dollars on a single Tuesday afternoon. Now she spends her days on her feet wearing a stiff polyester uniform, folding sweaters, and fetching shoes for the exact same high society women she used to gossip with. They do not invite her to their country club brunches anymore. They just snap their fingers and ask her to check the back for a size 4. As for Valerie and Harrison, the illusion of their grand, untouchable dynasty has entirely evaporated. They are technically still living in their castle, but it has become a beautifully decorated prison. They can no longer host their lavish charity galas or their ridiculous catered dinner parties. They can barely afford to keep the lights on. Under the ironclad terms of my lease, they are responsible for every single maintenance cost, every utility bill, and every property tax installment. They had to fire the landscaping crew. They had to dismiss the private chef. They are living on a strict, suffocating budget, terrified of making a single mistake. This morning, the first of the month arrived. I sat in my sleek corner office at Vanguard Holdings, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. My executive assistant knocked softly and walked in, carrying the morning mail. She placed a single crisp white envelope on the center of my mahogany desk. I sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener. Inside was a heavy stock cashier's check made out to Vanguard Holdings for the exact amount of the Oak Brook market rate rent. At the bottom of the check was Harrison's signature. The handwriting was shaky, hesitant, and entirely defeated. It was the physical manifestation of his complete surrender. He had written a massive check to the daughter he had spent decades calling a financial liability. I did not deposit that first check. I did not need the cash. I needed the trophy. I called in a private courier and sent the check to a high-end art gallery. I had it professionally mounted on a stark white background and sealed inside a heavy, matte black frame. When it returned, I drove a nail into the wall directly behind my desk and hung it up. Now, every single time a client, an investor, or an employee walks into my office, the first thing they see is my father's rent check. It is a daily, undeniable reminder of exactly who holds the power. The toxic hierarchy that defined my entire existence has been completely, meticulously destroyed. The golden child is folding cardigans in a basement for minimum wage. The arrogant, untouchable parents are struggling, terrified tenants living paycheck to paycheck to appease their landlord. And the scapegoat, the forgotten middle child who was never supposed to amount to anything, owns the ground they walk on. I do not need their apologies. I do not need their sudden, desperate attempts at reconciliation. I do not need the conditional, manipulative love they withheld from me for 30 years. I bought my peace. I secured my independence. I shattered their empire and built my own on top of the ruins. Valerie was right about one thing. I do not have them anymore. I am entirely removed from their chaotic, fraudulent world. But as I sit in my office looking at the framed check on the wall and the skyline beyond my window, I know with absolute certainty that I have never felt so victorious. I leave the framed check on the wall and step out of my office, taking the private elevator up to my penthouse. The doors slide open with a soft, expensive whisper, revealing the sprawling, immaculate sanctuary I built with my own 2 hands. I walk over to the center of the sunken living room and sink into the plush, custom velvet sofa. The camera slowly begins to circle me, capturing the panoramic floor-to-ceiling windows that wrap around the penthouse. The vibrant, pulsating glow of the city skyline stretches out infinitely behind me, casting a warm, golden halo over my shoulders. I lean back, crossing my legs, resting my hands effortlessly on my lap. I look directly into the lens, feeling a profound, untouchable tranquility settling deep into my bones. For my entire life, I was told a very specific story about who I was and what I was worth. I was the cautionary tale. I was the difficult child, the stubborn anomaly, the ungrateful daughter who simply could not fall in line. I was the dark cloud hanging over their perfectly curated country club existence. I carried that heavy, suffocating label for decades, walking into every family gathering with my guard up, bracing myself for the inevitable barrage of thinly veiled insults, the condescending sighs, and the constant crushing comparisons to my sister. They wanted me to believe that I was fundamentally broken, because I did not fit into their shiny, superficial mold. But the truth, the absolute, undeniable reality that took me 30 years to finally understand, is that their mold was nothing but a fragile, terrifyingly hollow facade. We are taught to look at the golden child and feel jealousy. We are conditioned to look at women like Imani and believe they have won the lottery of life. She had the endless funding, the unwavering parental praise, the luxury cars, and the effortless path paved in gold. But being the golden child is not a blessing, it is the ultimate sabotage. My parents completely handicapped her. By shielding her from every single consequence, by applauding her worst impulses and funding her most ridiculous demands, they stripped her of the ability to survive in the real world. They built her a beautiful gilded cage, and the second the door swung open, she had absolutely no idea how to fly. When the money stopped, Imani had no spine, no substance, and no survival instincts. She was entirely dependent on a system that was always destined to collapse. And then there was Chad. Chad was the perfect addition to their delusion. He was a man who understood that if you wear a bespoke suit and speak with enough unearned confidence, desperate status-obsessed people will hand you the keys to their kingdom. My parents did not back Chad because they believed in his business. They backed him because he looked the part. He matched the aesthetic. They were perfectly willing to mortgage their entire legacy, their home, and their future just to keep up the appearance of elite superiority. They gambled everything on a ghost because the truth was entirely too boring for them to accept. For years, I sat across from them at dinner tables and watched them perform this exhausting, pathetic play. I watched them lie to their friends, lie to the world, and most importantly, lie to themselves. And every time I refused to participate in the charade, every time I chose my own independence over their conditional charity, I became the enemy. They needed me to be the failure. They desperately needed me to be the struggling, pathetic outcast, because my struggle was the only thing that validated their false superiority. If I was failing, then their toxic system was working. But the moment I stopped playing their game, the moment I stepped out of the tiny, suffocating box they tried to force me into and started building my own empire, they absolutely panicked. They didn't hate me because I was a failure. They hated me because they knew deep down I was the only one who didn't need their fake reality to survive. I was the only one who knew how to bleed, how to sweat, and how to build something from the absolute bottom. I did not need a trust fund. I did not need a country club membership. I did not need a fraudulent husband in a shiny suit to validate my existence. I had my own mind, my own drive, and my own unbreakable will. That kind of independence is absolutely terrifying to people who rely on control. When you no longer need them to survive, they lose all their power over you. True revenge is not just about taking their house or foreclosing on their assets. Those are just the logistical details. True revenge is outgrowing them. True revenge is reaching a level of personal and financial dominance where their opinions, their insults, and their frantic attempts at manipulation cannot even breach the atmosphere of your world. Right now, my mother and father are sitting in a house they no longer own, terrified of missing a payment to the daughter they spent a lifetime dismissing. My sister is folding clothes for minimum wage, learning exactly how hard the real world actually hits. And I am sitting here looking out over a city that I conquered, breathing in the absolute silence of my own unshakable peace. I do not feel anger anymore. I do not feel resentment. I feel completely, utterly free. I severed the toxic roots, and in doing so, I finally allowed myself to bloom. Have you ever had to use your success to crush the arrogance of people who looked down on you? Let me know your story in the comments. Subscribe and remember, the best way to silence a hater is to make sure they can't afford to sit at your table.